Before I start today's video, I would just like to make a personal note that I just got my highest Tetris score ever at 313,000. So, if you're not a pro Tetris player, you're just a hobbyist like me who does it to mute your brain sometimes, feel free to send me your highest Tetris scores. I'd love to see them. Today we're going to be talking about COINTELPRO, but before I get into that, I would like to discuss something that I often think about when I hear certain things you'll hear in everyday conversation today, mainly conspiracy theories. The thing to me about conspiracy theories is governments around the world have always done things that are much worse than whatever the conspiracy theory actually is. Or we actually have evidence about whatever that conspiracy theory is that it logically didn't happen. And the things that, for instance, we're going to be talking about today did indeed happen and warrant not just public outrage, but legal courses of action and indictments. My main issues with this usually come with 9/11 and John F. Kennedy, but I'll be discussing those in future videos. Today we're going to be discussing COINTELPRO. Last video I mentioned having several authors or intellectual minds that usually influence me. I even put them in the description. I'll put them here today. Today we're going off of a few different things. Two Noam Chomsky books, Understanding Power by Chomsky and Who Rules the World by Noam Chomsky. There's also a bit at the end of Manufacturing Consent, the conclusion, that discusses this and why it wasn't more prominent in the media. We're also going to be talking about the book, The Assassination of Fred Hampton, how the FBI and Chicago police murdered a Black Panther by Jeffrey Haas, because Fred Hampton is a major point of this story. COINTELPRO was an operation throughout the late 50s, early 60s, implemented early 60s. It was thought of at first during the Eisenhower administration to infiltrate the peace movements and other activist movements of those times to disenfranchise them and disrupt them. You can look at the people who would eventually become a part of the Carter administration, known as the Trilateral Commission, wrote that the most dangerous thing to the United States was the democracy that was being formed during this time period. The idea that people who were not elite, the middle and lower classes, had an idea that they could be implements to change. This has been an idea that has been frowned upon always in the United States, but became quite apparent throughout the 70s and 80s, is that the most dangerous thing towards American society is the idea that poor and working class people will have a say in their government because they'll do things that the elites who, as George Carlin once put it, rule this place and own this place don't want us to do. So in brings COINTELPRO, and the wonderful start of COINTELPRO, of course, goes back to the progressive and peace-loving Kennedy administration, which is held on a pedestal by every neoliberal friend you might know who claims that he was assassinated by the government because he was trying to bring some sort of new America or whatever. COINTELPRO was, once again, to repeat what I said at the beginning, the infiltration and disruption of peace movements, mainly the civil rights movement and others throughout the country that we'll talk about here momentarily. Focusing on the civil rights movement, the COINTELPRO operation spread propaganda that insisted they were communist, they were anti-Americans, things like that. They even went as far as to attack leaders, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King being prominent. Others we'll talk about here soon, mainly Fred Hampton, who was assassinated as a part of this operation. Martin Luther King, a lot of people have known about how he was targeted by COINTELPRO and the FBI. The FBI sent him letters, audio tapes, blackmail, trying to get Martin Luther King Jr. to kill himself, commit suicide, in an attempt to disrupt the civil rights movement. This was ongoing for decades, all the way, in fact, there is a civil suit you can look up. It has a nice little Wikipedia page. It has been, at the federal level, discounted, but there is a mounting evidence that James Earl Ray, the assassin of Martin Luther King Jr., was either framed or in some way a part of an FBI plot to assassinate Martin Luther King. You'll note that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated after Civil Rights Act had been passed. Martin Luther King Jr. had then worked towards the peace activist movement and the poor people's movement, trying to bring an end to poverty in the United States. Once again, something that has never been acceptable among elite cultures. There always needs to be poor people. But But Martin Luther King was assassinated, and the movements quickly died off. And throughout the 70s and 80s, up until now, the events of the civil rights movement have been dissipated and gutted for the most part. And there's a firm legal history. You can look it all up. I might link it in the description, but that's all for you. COINTELPRO, of course, also attacked Malcolm X in the same way. It also attacked Muhammad Ali. That was the issue of, I mean, you can look into the Muhammad Ali story, and it's not all COINTELPRO, but it is very clear that there was a media and bias against him. I mean, if you want comparisons, Muhammad Ali was a black American, very prominent, changed his name from Cassius Clay upon joining the Nation of Islam, and was not going to go to Vietnam to fight. He defended this for various reasons, and he said he was a conscious objector based on his religion. He was denied this and stripped of the heavyweight title and given pretty harsh penalties because of this. You can look towards other people, other famous Americans who got out of the Vietnam War. You can look at former President George W. Bush, who got out of it, or former President Donald J. Trump, who got out of the Vietnam War, based on lesser reasons than religious morality. But nonetheless, COINTELPRO continued to grow, and as stated earlier, it started with the Kennedy administration implementing it through then Attorney General Bobby Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy, who of course was a prominent, he later became the hero of certain people. Look at him, and his assassination is similar in the way they look at JFK, but the reality of the situation is Bobby Kennedy really implemented the COINTELPRO operation to disrupt and deregulate and derail the civil rights movements, the peace movements, the poor people's movements, and so on and so forth. These are all people who you're regularly lied to about what their place was in American history. See, that's the thing about COINTELPRO is we can, of course, look towards Cuba, El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Iraq, Afghanistan, other places for foreign policy that disrupted and destroyed. But COINTELPRO was here. It was domestic, and it was an assault directly on the American people. And it included assassination, political assassination by the FBI through the Chicago Police Department, which brings us to Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton was a young man who started what is known as the Rainbow Coalition as part of the National Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party was a target of COINTELPRO. You can look through the Black Panther Party's beginnings to see very quickly that they have always been a target of political character assassination, from Reagan in California to what we're getting ready to talk about. Fred Hampton was, as previously mentioned, deputy chairman of the National Black Panther Party, and of course the chair of the Illinois chapter because he was from Chicago. As a progressive African American, and this is a direct quote, he founded the Rainbow Coalition, which was a prominent political organization that included the Panthers, the Young Patriots, which the Young Patriots were a movement of poor white people in the Chicago area, the Young Lords, which was poor Hispanics. And Fred Hampton is also famous, outside of the assassination, for canceling infighting between gangs in Chicago to work towards a greater good. A greater good, of course, being that racism and elitism is the greatest threat to the lower classes, not each other. So they began working together. They did a lot of really impressive and fantastic things for the people. They organized food drives. They were able to help out a lot of young single mothers through their organization and keeping them fed, keeping them housed. They did several things that are still ongoing today. If you get a chance, look into the Lighthouse Project in Chicago. That's one that I actually got a chance to talk to one of the founders of that way back when I was still more involved than I am today. And the Lighthouse Project is still ongoing, and it's still those basic organizational ground roots methods that started with Fred Hampton here. And Fred Hampton was a young man. He was in his late teens, early 20s when he died. But of course, as previously mentioned, these are things that are not allowed here. You're not allowed to form your own grassroots movement that makes it clear that if poor people work together, they can, create things and join something better than themselves and work together to achieve stability, both economically, food-wise, and housing. That's not things that they want you to know. You're supposed to go work for the man, for less of a better term. But Fred Hampton, nonetheless, got all these things moving, not by himself. That's something that always needs to be clear too. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Fred Hampton, all the other civil rights leaders, could not have done any of this stuff by themselves. Their names ring out, but without the backing of the entire organizations, without the backing of churches, without the backing of nonprofit social organizations, and of course just masses of people working together, they could not have achieved the wonderful things that they achieved. The reason Fred Hampton really sticks out is because of COINTELPRO. He was doing wonderful and terrific things. He was very influential, and he was leading what could have made this world a better place, but the federal government decided that under no circumstances was this something they could permit. So the FBI pretty much pounced on it immediately. Their first method was trying to bring back the interrelations of violence between the gangs that Fred Hampton had brought peace to. They sent notes saying that Fred Hampton was not really working for the better of black people. He was working for the better of himself and himself only, and that the best thing would be for him to go, meaning for him to be assassinated. They told the Chicago Police Department to keep eyes on him and to always constantly be harassing him and his people. There's a long history of Fred Hampton's section of people and his group that he walked with constantly being harassed by the Chicago Police Department, which leads us to his assassination. The Chicago Police Department, through the FBI, had an informant who was acting as a bodyguard for Fred Hampton. This person, it is strongly alleged, the evidence there is shaky, but it is strongly alleged, drugged Fred Hampton and then was coerced into giving the Chicago Police Department, ergo the FBI as well, information that said that there was drugs and weapons in Fred Hampton's apartment. Fred Hampton's good friend Mark Clark, also working as a bodyguard for him at that time, was in the building in this little apartment that they were living in, and the informant was there along with a few other people, including in the room with a drugged Fred Hampton was his wife, who was 8 months pregnant with their child. The Chicago Police Department used this information to perform a raid on the building. As they entered the building, they opened somewhere between 90 to 99 shots on the members of the building minus the informant who was there. The only shot that was returned from the Black Panthers came from Mark Clark's shotgun. He shot once and did not hit anybody in the raid. The police then entered the room where Fred Hampton was drugged and sleeping and promptly assassinated him in his bed. The 7 other members of the Panther Party who were in the room who survived the attack were later arrested and charged with attempted murder of peace officers. Then, in the 70s, at the same time as the Watergate scandal was just getting ready to take off, there was a break-in into the FBI building, which led to the existence, an FBI building in Pennsylvania, to be clear, which led to the existence of COINTELPRO, was revealed and reported to very little traction. No one in the elite media was going to report on this kind of thing. They weren't going to report on a Black Panther leader being assassinated in his bed. I mean, it made like little coverage about it because Watergate was the huge scandal, when in reality Watergate was small potatoes compared to the fact that the FBI had assassinated a United States citizen. So The FBI brokered a deal with the U.S. Deputy General to hide all this information, including, all of COINTELPRO as in existence. We can discuss the media coverage about that some other time, but it's just another example of how your information is just constantly being controlled and you're constantly being lied to is not the right term. Willfully deceived. The term manufacturing consent is a regarding of they're manufacturing your consent to do what you want to do. Most Americans, if they had all the information, would not support the things we see. After the FBI break-in, and that released the information of COINTELPRO and the subsequent deal brokered with the general attorney or whatever, the Michigan Socialist Workers Party headquarters was broken into, and the list of its supporters, contributors, and subscribers were stolen from the campaign, and many of those people were then later harassed, and this was never solved or given any sort of information whatsoever. However, the man who broke into the FBI headquarters in Pennsylvania and released COINTELPRO, you can go ahead and imagine what happened to those activists, because that's probably what happened. They were severely punished as well. So that's COINTELPRO. There is a lot of evidence out there. You can look up on the Wikipedia page that has a lot of good sources that you can look further into it, because it's still going on to this day. COINTELPRO-like operations have been happening towards the Occupy Wall Street movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Pride movement, and the Free Palestine movement as it has grown throughout the United States. And the media, of course, has been completely complicit in all of this as well. You can look at the Occupy Wall Street movement as a really big source of repeating what was repeated about the peace movement in the 60s. These people are young, uneducated. They're also smelly. They don't know anything. They're extremist. If you're a proud Palestinian supporter, you're anti-Semitic. If you're a part of any of these movements, they'll find the negatives to peace at you. No matter what type of protest you go to, if it gets enough traction, you're going to be accused of looting and violence and all sorts of other terrible things that are going to be highlighted in the news. What's not highlighted is your actual message. But this is the FBI, and COINTELPRO was an FBI operation that systematically utilized all of the government's resources it could to disrupt the civil rights movement, and in the end, while it wasn't the actual end, in the end of the idea of this video, assassinated an American citizen in American soil. Fred Hampton was a man trying to better the world, and he was killed because of it. Same way as Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated for similar reasons. You can look throughout American history for a lot of this kind of thing that has happened and happened and happened. But the main idea is that I'd like to get to everyone is that we all need to stick together, and we all need to love each other and work towards the real enemy, which is the elite culture that continues to try to hold this down. Go ahead, look into the Trilateral Commission, the democracy portion of that. It's a Wikipedia page if you want to look into it. There's books and things that you could look into it that are way better. But yeah, next time I make a video, it's probably going to be about the 2024 election, because it'll be a week before that happens, and I think that'd be fun to talk about. I plan on talking about a lot of different things, but if there's anything political in general you think I should talk about, go ahead and make a comment. I think it would be really cool to do a series where I just discuss the post-World War II presidents and their administrations and all the things that they did that they should be condemned for. But nonetheless, keep fighting the good fight. And you, as probably always, until hopefully a ceasefire is reached, and then a two-state solution is reached, and then a one-state solution is reached, you can find the United States Campaign for Palestinian Rights linked in the description. You can donate. You can have it generate emails to send to your senators. I just had my local state senator email me back today, and I have started a correspondence talking about this issue amongst other issues I would like to see changed. Demand that the United States stop sending weapons to Israel now. Demand a ceasefire now. Bring peace to the region in any way you can. And stay positive. It's a harsh world out there, and while these are hard subjects, I know that we can all, work together and persevere. So take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time.